Are you still stuck trying to work out what automation tool to use? You've got Zapier, n8n, Make, and a few others that are out there at the moment. Choosing the wrong tool could cost you thousands in the future in both wasted time and full system rebuilds. In the last year alone, we've built enterprise level systems on all of these tools for businesses doing $1 million per year each. And then there are a few pros and cons I've picked up on each of the tools and what I think is the best fit for you. Your automation tool becomes the backbone of all operations. Once you pick one and start implementing tools into it, it becomes very challenging to change that tool later down the line. Trust me, this is something that we have done before where we've started building on one platform, the more complex automations come up and we have to move to a different platform. This then means you have to configure everything from the start. You've got to re-go through all the logic, start the databases again, and connect all the new tools back into the new software. If you don't pick the right tool from the get-go, you're going to run into scaling limits. You'll end up having broken architecture, the logic won't work, and you're going to end up in a lot of architectural debt. What I wanted to do was run through each of the tools, go through some of the benefits, why they might be best for your business, the better use cases, and some of the things that are worth knowing in case you want to avoid particular tools. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly which tool is the best one to use, depending on the size of your business, the scalability of the business, and how much automation you actually want to do within your company itself. It may also give you an idea that if you're using a particular tool already, you might want to think about migrating over to another tool before it becomes too late. So what I want to do was jump into a few pros and cons per each software, but start off, I want to run through why your tool choice matters. So it's important to notice automation shapes the company agility. What I mean by this is the wrong tool is only going to make things worse. You're going to end up finding more bottlenecks, hidden costs, and wasted talent for another tool that you might have been able to use. What I mean by this is as soon as you start jumping into automation, that particular tool becomes your business operating system. You do not want to leave that tool. It is way too much of a pain to do so if you decide to go down that route. One of the biggest things about picking a tool is if you start to outgrow it, it is almost like doing heart surgery. What I mean by that is you then have to change everything, update your APIs, re-import all the data back into a new tool, and completely build the architecture from scratch. If you've built something in Zapier and then want to rebuild that in n8n, it's not as easy as copy and paste. You have to start from ground zero. Another thing to focus on is misaligned tools force bending ops. So as your business is scaling, as your automation is getting more complex, some of these tools won't be able to do what you want it to do, which means you might have to cut corners, which is only going to affect the automation as a whole. This means what you thought might have been a flexible tool actually is now going to limit you in the future because you can't do what you wanted to do. So to kick off, we have Zapier. Zapier is well known across all sorts of industries. It's the staple to what probably started the automation world. It has by far the most amount of connections that you can do natively within the app without having to call custom APIs. Zapier is good for quick wins. It is a very easy to use software. It's very great for small to medium sized businesses and specifically non-technical founders. It has a very easy onboarding. You can use it to build custom tools just from writing in what it is you're looking to do. It has a massive app ecosystem, which means it's got something like 5,000 apps already plugged into Zapier, which means all you need to do is either connect to the app, log in through Zapier, and the rest is going to be sorted for you. This is really handy if you just want to connect something like PandaDoc to a CRM update. This will all be built into Zapier and can be done exceptionally fast. Another great thing about Zapier is there are templates everywhere. People have been using Zapier for years. As I said, it was one of the first ever tools to come out there where you could start plugging tools together. So there is an awful lot of information online about pulling in a template here, using someone else's template there. That's when the pros start to stop with Zapier. Yes, it's great to get going. Yes, it's got a lot of app integrations, but the weaknesses very quickly outweigh the pros. For example, it is very expensive at scale. If you want to only build one or two automations because you want to connect a couple of tools together, it'll be perfect. If you want to start doing more complex tasks, you want to build a whole ecosystem of automations within the business, the way in which Zapier prices is it is exceptionally expensive. To give you an example, Make's free plan is better than Zapier's first paid plan. Then we come on to limited logic and branching. There isn't huge amounts of logic you can build into them. It's very simply you start here and you end here. There might be a couple of filters in the middle, but you don't get the opportunity to choose what sort of filters or routing you would like that automation to go down. With that being said, it is also very brittle for enterprise. Enterprise is a lot more complicated. There are a lot more moving parts, tools connecting to different things, talking to each other, and Zapier isn't going to get you there. Zapier is good for, as I said, the smaller automations, the more simple connection of tools, 1, 2, 3 tools talking to each other, not a whole suite talking to each other. So to give an overview, Zapier is probably good for companies doing well under $1 million per year in revenue. It is also good if you have a limited amount of teams, so you've not got huge staff members within the business doing a load of different stuff. And it also is great if you have zero dev requirements across the business at all. So if no one in the business knows how to do anything when it comes to coding, logic, development, Zapier would be perfect. Then we come down to Make. Now, Make is a great starting place to get started with building automations. It can do an awful lot, and there is probably not a need for you to go into n8n with some of the first automations you're going to be building. So what is Make best for? Visual workflows. It's very UI friendly. You can see exactly what talks to one another. You get a very nice detailed overview of where the data is flowing, how it's routing, and where you're going to end up. Within that, it means it's also good for scaling startups, people who are looking to implement their first few automations. They are willing to put a little bit more time into learning, which also means it's great for agencies. If you are just getting started within the AI automation space, Make is definitely the perfect tool to get started with because it's the easiest to learn. There's not a huge learning curve to it once you understand how the platform works, and you can very quickly start to build out some pretty complex automations within a matter of time. Then we move on to just some of the normal strengths it's got. The scenario builder, it's live data. You can see how the data's moving. Everything's laid out with history, incompleted tasks, which data is specifically moving between each module. It is much cheaper at scale, far cheaper than using Zapier. As I said, the free plan within Make is already better than Zapier's paid plan. And it also has very good logic tools. There's a lot of routing you can do. You can do a lot of logic, pause here, wait here, ignore that, retry different scenarios for error handlers. It is great at doing that within a very nice to use interface. Some of the weaknesses being over Zapier is there is a steeper learning curve. It is a bit more complicated to know, but once you get past those first few automations, you start to understand how the platform works. Don't get me wrong, Make is massively catching up to Zapier, which means you have a lot of native applications you could connect to, but it isn't quite as extensive as what Zapier is at, which means you are going to have to use custom APIs in order to get access to data in those tools that aren't natively in Make. And one of the third weaknesses being the overwhelming UI. As I said, it is nice to look at and you can get to understand it, but from a glance, if you've never gone into a Make account before or built out your first scenario, it is going to look very alien and you are going to have to get used to that. So how does Make stack up for your company? If you're doing anywhere between $1 and $10 million per year, it could be a great tool. There is a caveat to that depending on the amount of operations you've got, but it is a great starting place. It's also very good if you are growing with teams because you can integrate team members into it, you can add users whenever you want, and you can start to label and structure things within your scenario builders to keep everyone in the loop. And the final one being flexibility and efficiency. If you are still changing things, if your process is updating as you grow the business, Make allows you to make changes quickly, fast, and at scale without having to do too much once the build is already there. The major things with Make is it's super powerful, it's very affordable, and it's very good at growing your first start in the automation world, specifically if you want to build a few automations that talk to each other and utilize some of their tools like their built-in database. Then we move down to n8n. This is pretty much the GOAT of automation tools. It has an awful lot of functionality. It can do a whole lot more than some of these other tools can do combined, but there are some much greater learning curves when it comes to using n8n because there is a lot more code going on and it doesn't have many native tools. So starting with the best for, it's open source, which means you can send things to it, you can customize it and do whatever you want without any issues. That also comes in union with self-hosting. If you want to self-host the platform on your own server, you can do so by using something like Railway, which means if you've got personal data that you want to keep within a server, not in the cloud, you can do it relatively easy, and this can cost you almost nothing to do, which means using n8n becomes exceptionally cheap. It's also great for completely custom nodes. You have a lot of code opportunity with n8n to manipulate data specifically on how you want to use it, where Zapier and Make sort of lack within that realm, although Make have just released their first code module. Some more strengths for n8n is you get full data ownership, it's highly extensible, and there's no platform lock-in. So you can take the code and go somewhere else. You can turn it into a custom coded platform if you want to remove yourself from n8n completely. You can build some of the most complex automations you would have ever seen that will do everything that you could possibly imagine. And in terms of full data ownership, you can put all of that data in your own server, you manage it, you own it, it is entirely yours, as opposed to using something like Zapier where you're using their own cloud server, you've got a login, and you can't really do anything much with that data. So that moves on to the weaknesses. Requires dev knowledge. As I said, n8n is not for the faint-hearted. If you have never touched an automation in your life, you either want to jump in at the deep end and just learn it from the get-go, or you want to probably go into Make first, understand how automation works, how to connect tools together, the logic behind it, and then pivot into n8n. n8n has a much smaller ecosystem. It does not have many tools that you can natively connect to at all, which means you are going to have to use custom APIs, you're going to have to use webhooks in order to pull data between different tools, but it won't be as simple to do as if you were using Make or definitely Zapier. Another one is the infrastructure infrastructure and the servers that you use, you need to make sure that if you have a lot of operations going on, you are going to have to increase the size of your server in order to monitor all of those movements that are happening within the automations you've built. This isn't too much of a problem, but it's something that you are going to have to monitor. If you're using a server on Railway, for example, or Hostinger, you're going to have to keep an eye on the CPU usage. You're going to have to keep an eye on how much of that server is being used, and you will eventually have to upgrade it. However, doing so is still much cheaper than some of the alternatives. So the ideal stage, who is fit for n8n? Companies doing $10 million plus per year, big enterprise solutions, an awful lot of operations going on, upwards of 50, 100, 200 staff members within the business. It could even be full SaaS products that you want to automate. The back end, you can connect web apps directly to n8n, so you can have your infrastructure in a single automation, and then the front end of the app just talks to that back end tool. Another reason is compliance heavy industries. If you are moving a lot of data around, if you've got a lot of compliance and regulations you need to follow, self-hosting your own n8n server gets around a lot of this because you can put it on a server local to you, which means you're automatically complying to all of those regulations. So if we were then going to look at this from a top-down view, ease of use, Zapier wins every day of the week. In terms of cost efficiency, Make wins at scale, but you have to take into account the ease of use for that. You could go the other way with n8n, but right off the back, Make is great. Scalability is definitely n8n. You are going to need a little bit more of a development background in order to do this, but n8n wins on this by a country mile. In terms of flexibility, Make and n8n are both strong competitors. n8n probably more so, but Make will give you more than what you probably realize you need. In terms of the ecosystem that can connect to these tools, Zapier wins. As I said, I think they've got 5,000 plus native connections built into the app, whereas Make doesn't quite have that, and n8n is a mile off. And the final one being data control. Again, n8n wins purely based on the fact that you can self-host it, you can follow all these compliance rules, and you have a lot more control over your data. It is worth mentioning though that there is no best tool. It is the tool that suits your business best. If you want to start with some smaller automations in the beginning and you only want to use small automations, Zapier and Make are going to be fine. If you want to build a little bit more complex, Make is probably the sweet spot. And if you want to start automating all sorts in your business, you've got high process volumes, n8n is going to be the one you want to focus on. So now we come down to migration. If you are using a tool and want to switch to the other one, there are going to be some things you want to focus on. It's important to note that switching platforms means rebuilding your entire workflow. It's not just copying it. Depending on the tool you're going to, the whole logic will need to change. This means if you are migrating, it'll be worth doing one build at a time and phasing the full build into the new software. Which means, again, before you start the migration process, you are going to want to do an audit. You need to know what automations you're building, any new dependencies and changes that you're going to have to think about in order to switch over to a different software. If you're going from Zapier to n8n, there's going to be a lot more logic that you need to think about. There's probably going to be some more mapping that you need to set up, and you need to know this before getting started so you don't end up prolonging the process. Focus on your highest ROI builds first. As I said, if you're in Make and you want to go to n8n, don't start with the worst automation you've got. Start with the automation that is the highest priority. Make sure you can get that completed first, and then start to stack the smaller ones below that. Focus on the high value first and cut out the low impact until you're comfortable with the platform, you have everything else set up, and it's much easier to implement. You're going to have to rebuild your entire architecture, so you want to make sure you future-proofed your design. If you are on the fence about which tools you get started with, or if you are going to migrate, if you're already thinking about it and you're coming up against problems within the flows you've got, make the jump. Yes, it's going to be a pain to do, but it's going to be much more beneficial in the long term, because once you've picked the tool you're going to stick with, building new automations, adding data to it becomes much easier. But with that being said, if you do not need to change, do not change. Changing the tool you had can be a nightmare. If you're going to go in and do it yourself, it can take an awful lot of time. If you have an agency doing it, obviously that's sort of something you need to worry about, and you're more planning for the scalability within the company and where you're looking to take AI. Match the tool that you want to use with the processes of your business, but also look into the future at where you want to go with AI and make sure the tool is going to be suitable for that growth. Knowing the pros and cons to any of these tools is essential, but the real value comes when knowing what you're trying to implement into the business and whether you're building with scale in mind. Many people try to pick one tool and then they try and build their automations around it to fit into the tool that they've chosen. This means they're killing potential opportunities, they're killing possible builds that they might be doing, and they're losing all possible flexibility of what they can do in the future because they've cemented themselves into a tool that isn't ready for growth. If you run a business and are looking to either pick the right tool for you or migrate your current system into a new platform and don't want to go through the headache of setting everything else up, or you've got automations in mind, don't know the tool to use and want us to do it for you, schedule a 15-minute call below. We'll discuss what we could do in terms of an audit, map out the tools you can use, the automations that will be best for you, and what the future might look like for you implementing AI into your business. But if you want to give it a crack yourself, I've got another video that will walk you through how to do an audit on your business, which might help you decide which tool to use.